Good morning, St. Francis, and good morning, people of God. Today is Monday, the 6th day of November 2023, Monday of the 31st week of the year, the 31st week in Ordinary Time. Again, counting down to the end of our liturgical year, of our church year, 4 more weeks basically left, a little less than 4 more weeks until the end of this year, until we move into the season of Advent. Coming to you from our courtyard here at the Franciscan School, where we have just completed a morning prayer and then a fire drill. So busy morning already for us here. But our readings for today on this Monday of the 31st week of the year, continuing with Romans, and we'll continue with Romans for the next couple of days. Next week, I believe, we move into the Book of Wisdom, which will be nice because finally we'll be done with the Book of Romans, or the letter to the Romans. But again, the letter to the Romans, it's a very complicated book, or very complicated letter, and sometimes there's lots of contradictions. And again, it doesn't look as though Paul was really thinking through some things. And again, as a scribe and or a Pharisee, he was knowledgeable of the law, but knowledgeable of Jesus's twists on the law, that's always the thing. And because he was not a direct disciple, he comes in afterwards, and yet he takes over for everybody. And so it's always the idea, are his thoughts and are his understandings of what it meant to live this life correct, or fully correct, or as correct as can be? You know, that's always the issue. And so we have this part of this letter where he first says one thing that's very wonderful, is that the gifts and the call of God are irrevocable, which means that God cannot go back on what God has given or what God calls us to. So God, is sort of locked into that. And so if God says God loves, then God loves, and God will never go back on that love. If God says God forgives, then God forgives, and God never goes back on that forgiveness. So it's important for us, and always to remember and to consider and reflect upon, especially in our lives when we think that we are separated and lost from God because God has left us or abandoned us. That cannot be further from the truth, because God says, I will not do this, and God's call and God's gifts are irrevocable. So let's remember that. Then the letter goes into some interesting kinds of things about, how God made disobedience happen or makes suffering happen so that we can know how merciful God is. And again, you don't punish your child basically to say how much you love your child. You don't, because that's Munchausen's disease. In some ways, where we constantly harm your child because you want to care for your child. You show your child how much you care for them by making them sick and making them ill and whatever it is. That can't be right, and it's not good. And that's, again, it's not the way that God acts. But for some reason, whatever other kind of Greek philosophy was moving into Israel at this time, because you do have this whole great mixing of cultures that's happening at the time of Jesus and the time of Paul, this whole idea about evil and the source of it and what have you, and its power and things like that, is getting into what Paul is trying to say, which isn't very true to what Jesus never ever says. Something like that. Oh, go ahead and suffer people because this will make me feel more important and make me feel more powerful because I can heal you. That's not why Jesus comes. And again, the whole idea of disobedience never mentioned in that 3rd chapter of Genesis with the basically eating of that fruit, and nor is it, again, a matter of humanity wanting to willfully destroy God's creation. That doesn't happen, although that kind of happens now. But it's again about this humanity forgetting who and what it is and following down a road that leads to things that humanity is not. So forgetting who we are and moving into what we are not is where the problem lies. Not a God who basically says, I'm going to harm you and punish you and make you experience disobedience and guilt and pain and suffering so you can know how merciful I am. That's a kind of, it's an odd God. It's not it's a God we have to ask ourselves, do we want to be a part of? Do we want to be part of this God's life? In the gospel today, we have an interesting other kind of situation where Jesus gets invited, to the house of a leading Pharisee, and then Jesus proceeds to lecture the leading Pharisee on who he should invite and who he should not invite to parties. And again, the question is always, well, should he have invited you, Jesus? Because you really are a pain when it comes to accepting hospitality and it comes to accepting, some kind of goodness from people. Now, again, did that leading Pharisee want to invite Jesus because he wanted to show off? And maybe that's why Jesus is saying what he does. But it's the whole idea is that we don't do things to show off. We shouldn't do things to show off. We should do things out of generosity, out of a constant spirit of generosity. To force people into acts of service is not is not good service. It's not showing anything else. And so sometimes, again, when we have these service requirements for different sacraments, it drives me crazy because we're forcing people into service. We are not making it seem as though it is a part of a daily in and out breathing of our lives. It is something that we are being forced to do, and thereby becomes an obligation. And as an obligation, is it really useful? Is it really helpful to us? Because if it's an obligation, then it isn't working. Then it isn't helping us in any way to achieve that faith, achieve that wonder, achieve that goodness that God knows we can achieve. A blessed day, St. Francis and people of God. May the Lord give you his peace.